Welcome back, occultists, to a new video. These are a collection of stories that took place during late-night driving sessions. If you are new to the channel, make sure to like and subscribe for more content. Let's begin. The life of a truck driver is one of solitude, long hours on the road with nothing but your thoughts and the endless stretch of asphalt before you. My name is Jack, and I've seen a lot in my years on the road, but nothing compares to that one night, a night that haunts my dreams and shakes my soul. I was driving through rural Illinois, the darkness enveloping my truck like a shroud. The clock on my dashboard read 3 a.m., and the only light came from my headlights, cutting through the night. The road was deserted, the world asleep, leaving me alone with the hum of my engine and a rhythmic thud of tires on pavement. As I rounded a bend, my headlights caught something in the distance, an object in the middle of the road. I slowed down, squinting to make out what it was. It looked like a car, a black sedan, turned sideways, blocking both lanes. A shiver ran down my spine. Something about the scene felt off. There were no hazard lights, no sign of movement. It was as if the car had just been abandoned. Cautiously, I brought my truck to a stop a few yards away. I hesitated, debating whether to drive around or check if someone needed help. My gut told me to stay put, to drive away, but my conscience wouldn't let me. What if someone was hurt? I grabbed my flashlight and stepped out of the truck. The air was cold, a biting chill that seeped through my jacket. The silence was oppressive, broken only by the creaking of my truck as it settled. As I approached the car, flashlight in hand, I called out, asking if anyone was there. No response. I shone my light into the car. It was empty. The doors were closed, the windows intact. It was as if the driver had simply vanished into thin air. A sense of unease crept over me. I scanned the surrounding area, the beam of my flashlight cutting through the darkness. The fields on either side of the road were empty, the night still and quiet. That's when I heard it, a faint whispering sound, coming from the woods lining the road. It was soft, barely audible, like the rustling of leaves. But there was no wind, the night eerily calm. The whispering grew louder, more insistent. It seemed to be calling my name, a sibilant, hissing voice that twisted my insides. I tried to convince myself it was just my imagination, the fatigue playing tricks on me. Then I saw them, figures emerging from the tree line, shrouded in darkness. They were human in shape, but there was something off about them, something unnatural. Their movements were jerky, erratic, as if they weren't fully in control of their bodies. I froze, my heart pounding in my chest. The figures continued to advance, their whispering growing louder, more demanding. I couldn't make out their faces, but I could feel their eyes on me, a malevolent gaze that chilled my blood. Panic set in, and I turned to run back to my truck. I fumbled with my keys, my hand shaking uncontrollably. I managed to get inside and lock the doors just as the figures reached the edge of the road. I started the engine and floored the accelerator, the truck lurching forward. I glanced in the rearview mirror, the figures were chasing me, keeping pace with the truck. Their speed was unnatural, their forms a blur in the darkness. I pushed the truck to its limits, the engine roaring as I raced down the road. The figures began to fall behind, disappearing into the night. I didn't stop driving until I reached the next town, the first hints of dawn lighting the sky. I reported the incident to the police, but they found nothing. No sign of the car, no figures, nothing. They suggested I had fallen asleep at the wheel and dreamt the whole thing. But I know what I saw, what I experienced. The rest of my journey was a blur. I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched, of being followed. Every shadow seemed to hide a threat, every noise a whispering figure. I made it home, but the terror of that night stayed with me. I couldn't sleep, the slightest sound sending me into a panic. The whispering continued to haunt me, a constant, sinister presence in my mind. In the weeks that followed, I tried to make sense of what happened. I researched the area, looking for any explanation, legends, history, anything. But I found nothing that could explain the figures in the night. I started driving different routes, avoiding that stretch of road. But the fear never left me. I was constantly looking over my shoulder, jumping at shadows. The isolation of the road, once my solace, had become my prison. My colleagues noticed a change in me. I was jumpy, irritable, a shadow of my former self. I couldn't tell them what had happened, couldn't share the burden of that night. They wouldn't understand, they might even think I was losing my mind. Eventually, I stopped driving. I couldn't face the road anymore, couldn't bear the thought of being alone with the whispering darkness. I took a job at a local warehouse, a mundane, safe existence that was a far cry from the freedom of the open road. But the memory of that night never faded. It lingered in the back of my mind, a dark reminder of the horrors that can lurk in the unseen corners of the world. Sometimes, late at night, I still hear the whispering. It's faint, barely audible, but it's there, a sibilant, hissing voice that calls my name. I know it's not real, just a figment of my traumatized mind. I've been a cab driver for years, roaming the streets of a small, nondescript town, but nothing could have prepared me for that one winter night. It started as just another shift, but soon turned into something out of a nightmare. The snow was falling heavily, the kind that blankets everything in a deceptive calm. Visibility was low, and the roads were near empty. That's when I saw him, a lone figure, hunched over in the cold, waving for a cab. I pulled over, and he got in, brushing off the snow. He was an odd fellow, wearing a long, tattered coat and a white-brimmed hat that shadowed his face. He spoke in a raspy whisper, "Take me to the old Henderson place, out by the woods." The Henderson place was infamous around town, a decrepit mansion miles from civilization, long abandoned. I hesitated, but the meter was running, and times were tough. I nodded and drove off into the night. As I drove, I tried making small talk, but the man remained silent, his gaze fixed out the window. The atmosphere was thick with unease, the only sound the wipers scraping against the windshield and the tires crunching over the snow. I noticed him shiver, his breaths coming out in ragged gasps. Concerned, I turned up the heat, but he didn't react. He just sat there, an enigmatic presence filling the cab with a heavy air. We were deep in the woods now, the Henderson place just a few bends away, when it happened. He convulsed suddenly, a strangled gasp escaping his lips, and then slumped over, unconscious. Panic set in. I stopped the cab, my heart racing. I tried to wake him, shaking his shoulder, but he was out cold. I checked his pulse, weak, but there. I didn't know what to do. We were miles from the nearest hospital, the roads treacherous. I decided to drive to the Henderson place, the only shelter for miles. Arriving at the mansion, I helped the man inside, using my phone's flashlight to navigate the dark, dust-laden corridors. The place was a ruin, the air stale with the scent of decay. I laid him down on an old couch and went to look for something to cover him with. That's when I found it, a room, its walls covered in newspaper clippings. They were all about a missing man, his face eerily familiar. It was him, my passenger. My blood turned to ice. The article spoke of his disappearance years ago, how he vanished without a trace. And here he was, in the very mansion his family once owned, now a ghost of his former self. I rushed back to the room where I had left him, but he was gone. In his place was a note, scrawled in shaky handwriting. "Thank you for bringing me home," it read. I stumbled out of the mansion, my mind reeling. The snow had stopped, the moon casting an eerie glow over the landscape. I got in my cab and drove, not stopping until I reached the safety of civilization. I reported what had happened to the police, but they found nothing. The Henderson place was empty, no sign of the man or his belongings. The experience haunted me. I couldn't shake the feeling that I had stumbled upon something otherworldly, a ghost trapped in time, replaying his final journey. Nights were the hardest. I'd lie awake, the image of the man and the decaying mansion playing over and over in my mind. The snow, once a symbol of purity, now reminded me of that night, of the secrets hidden beneath its blanket. I continued driving my cab, but I avoided the woods, the memory of that night too fresh, too raw. The mystery of the man consumed my thoughts. Was he a ghost, a figment of my imagination fueled by the isolation of the snowy night? Or had he somehow survived all these years, hidden away in the ruins of his family home? The town buzzed with rumors when I told my story, but no one could provide any answers. The Henderson mansion stood silent in the woods, its history a locked vault. The man's note haunted me. "Thank you for bringing me home." The words echoed in my mind, a plea from beyond the grave. It felt like I had been a pawn in a game played by the shadows of the past, a messenger for a spirit finding its way back. I couldn't escape the feeling that I had been part of something unexplainable, something that transcended the boundaries of the living and the dead. The line between reality and the supernatural had blurred that night, leaving me with more questions than answers. As the years passed, the incident became a local legend, a story whispered in the dim corners of bars and around campfires. But for me, it was more than a story. It was a chilling reminder of the night I came face to face with a mystery that defied explanation. Sometimes, on snowy nights, I find myself driving aimlessly, drawn to the woods, half expecting to see the man again, hailing my cab, ready to complete his eternal journey home. But the woods remain silent, the secrets of the Henderson mansion buried deep within its decaying walls. I've always prided myself on being brave, but nothing could have prepared me for the horror I encountered on that lonely stretch of road. My name is Emma, and this is my story, a chilling memory that haunts my every waking moment. It was late, and I was driving home from a friend's house, the moon a mere sliver in the night sky. The road was desolate, a ribbon of asphalt cutting through the dark, dense forest. The only sound was the hum of my car's engine and the occasional rustle of leaves in the breeze. As I rounded a bend, my headlights illuminated a bizarre scene. A group of men, 4 in total, were on the side of the road, shovels in hand, digging into the earth. My first thought was that they might need help. Perhaps their vehicle had broken down. Curiosity, tinged with concern, got the better of me, and I pulled over, rolling down my window. "Everything okay?" I called out, my voice steady despite the unease that gripped me. The men stopped digging and turned towards me. Their faces were obscured by the shadows, but there was something unsettling about them. One of them, taller than the others, stepped forward. "Just some car trouble," he said, his voice smooth, too smooth. Something about his tone set off alarm bells in my head. I noticed then that there was no vehicle in sight, just them and their shovels. My heart started to race, a sense of danger washing over me. "Do you need me to call for help?" I asked, my hand inching towards the ignition, ready to make a quick getaway. "No need, miss. We've got it under control," the tall man replied, his eyes glinting in the moonlight. I nodded, not convinced by his reassurance. As I began to roll up my window, I heard it, a muffled cry, barely audible over the hum of my engine. My blood ran cold. I should have driven away right then, but I didn't. Instead, I got out of the car, my phone in hand, ready to call the police. I took a few steps towards the men, trying to peer into the hole they had dug. That's when I saw it, a hand, jutting out from the earth, fingers clawing at the air. I gasped, my phone slipping from my grasp. The men moved quickly, surrounding me. The tall one grabbed my arm, his grip iron tight. "You shouldn't have stopped, miss," he hissed, his breath foul. Panic surged through me. I struggled, tried to scream, but his hand clamped over my mouth. The world spun, my thoughts a chaotic whirl. I don't know how, but I managed to break free. I ran back to my car, the men hot on my heels. My heart was pounding, adrenaline fueling my escape. I dove into the driver's seat, locking the doors just as they reached the car. They banged on the windows, their faces twisted in rage. I fumbled with the keys, my hands shaking uncontrollably. Finally, the engine roared to life, and I slammed on the gas, the car lurching forward. I didn't look back. I drove as fast as I could, the men's angry shouts fading into the night. My mind was reeling, terror and disbelief colliding in a dizzying vortex. I had stumbled upon something horrific, something that defied explanation. When I was a safe distance away, I pulled over and called the police, my voice a trembling whisper as I recounted what had happened. They told me to stay where I was and that they would send a patrol car. The wait was agonizing, every shadow in the forest seeming to move, every sound a potential threat. When the police finally arrived, I broke down, the events of the night crashing over me like a tidal wave. I led them back to the spot, but it was empty. The men, the shovels, the half-dug grave, all were gone, as if they had never been there. The police searched the area, but found nothing. No evidence of the men or their gruesome activity. I was questioned for hours, but there was little I could tell them. The men were strangers, their faces barely seen in the darkness. The police promised to investigate, but I could tell they were skeptical. Without evidence, my story was just that, a story. I couldn't go home that night, or many nights after. The memory of the hand reaching out from the earth haunted me, a silent plea for help that I had been too late to provide. I moved out of that town, unable to bear the weight of what I had seen. But the fear followed me. I started seeing shadows in every corner, jumping at every sound. The world seemed a darker place, its secrets more sinister. The police never found the men or uncovered the truth behind that night. The case grew cold, a mystery lost in the files of unsolved crimes. But I know what I saw. I know the evil that lurks in the heart of men, hidden away from the prying eyes of the world. Now, years later, I still find myself looking over my shoulder, still haunted by the memories of that night. The sound of shovels digging into the earth echoes in my dreams, a chilling reminder of the night I came face to face with a horror that was all too real. In that small, seemingly peaceful town, I encountered a darkness that changed me forever. It's a story I seldom share, a memory I try to keep buried. But some horrors are etched too deeply, leaving scars that never quite fade away.